The History of Poland, Episode 28, Setting the Stage. Hello and welcome back. Last time we left off with the end of a big push into Pomerania, capping the majority of Bolesław III's involvement in those territories on the Baltic Sea. As those who are familiar with the story of the Piast, there are only a few key topics left to cover in Bolesław's life. We're going to cover those today. Namely, we need to talk about some of the most reoccurring themes in Polish history: Hungarian succession, imperial politics, and domestic strife. Let's start with the Hungarians. At the beginning of the 1130s, Bolesław had a few key allies. To the west was Denmark. To the south were some Hungarians, though certainly not all of the members of the ruling family. To the east were the Rus. On the enemy side of things, he had the Empire, who were not big fans of his or his incursions into Pomerania, and the Bohemians, who were also not big fans of his. This patchwork of alliances and counter-alliances was not very stable, since the change of a single ruler in any one of these states, or perhaps a decisive battle that changed the ruling dynasty of any of those states, would have a cascading effect across all of Eastern and Northern Europe. Manteuffel tells us of just such a shift when he says, quote, "The course of Bolesław's Pomeranian policy was seriously hampered toward the end of his reign. In 1131, Bolesław's Danish ally was at war with the Empire, and was forced to submit after being soundly beaten. In the same year, another of Bolesław's allies, István II of Hungary, Kalaman's successor, died. This created a dangerous situation for Poland, because the new Hungarian king, Béla II, the son of Almos, who had been supported by the Empire, was related to the Prince of Bohemia and remained on good terms with the Empire. Bolesław was apprehensive that Hungary would side with the German-Czech camp, and therefore, together with Rus, he supported Béla's rival, Boris." End quote. So, just to recap that for you. Bolesław had an ally in Denmark, but due to conflict between Denmark and Germany, that ally was no longer picking up the phone. At the same time, the new king of Hungary was closely aligned with both Bohemia and the Empire. So, all of a sudden, the Polish state is faced with a wide swath of borderland that is open to a collaborative invasion, but without any allies in that direction to help him out. To try to rectify this situation, Bolesław organized an invasion of Hungary in 1132 with some help from the Rus. I like to think about the Rus and the Rurik ruling family as sort of the tough cousins that the Piast call on whenever they need some muscle. Manteuffel tells us about this invasion of Hungary, saying, quote, "A Polish campaign undertaken in 1132 was a total failure. The troops sent by the Babenbergs joined the enemy, and Boris's supporters proved to be especially weak. Bolesław was unable to withstand the opposition alone and suffered a serious defeat. The Czechs began diversionary attacks against Silesia, ravaging the province in a series of 4 incursions, 1132, 1133, and 2 in 1134. End quote. With the military arm of his government not doing great, Bolesław was not in a position to take another blow. It would be a bad time for something like an economic downturn to happen, a plague to hit, or betrayal to be fostered. While none of those may have struck at the heart of his dominions at that time, a religious blow did take place. Manteuffel tells us that, quote, "Poland faced still another threat at the same time. Pope Innocent II finally submitted to the pressures applied by Emperor Lothar and Archbishop Norbert of Magdeburg, and in 1133 he issued 2 bulls denying independence to the metropolitans of Gniezno and Lund. The Polish bishoprics were to be subordinate to Magdeburg, and the Scandinavian bishoprics were to be subject to Bremen. This decision, which opened the way for German influence to the north and the east, was a serious threat to Denmark's and Poland's independence. The episcopates of both countries were reluctant to submit to this papal order. They responded slowly, and even attempted countermeasures by appealing to the antipope, Anacletus II." End quote. This is not only a serious attack on Polish independent rule, but it is almost tantamount to an attack on the Polish identity. Being removed from events by 900 years nowadays, the nuances of religious decrees might seem like a low priority thing. We could imagine it like a simple pyramid, with the Pope at the top, and then cardinal archbishoprics covering nation-sized territories, bishoprics covering more regional territories, and local churches at the bottom. What does it matter if the pieces of the pyramid shift around a bit, you may ask? What does it matter if all of a sudden the independence of Gniezno is subjected to the authority of Magdeburg? Well, unfortunately, that's not really the right way to look at it. If the order from the Pope had ended up being implemented, it would mean that a key pillar of Polish identity would be stripped from Poland. Instead of having an independent channel of communication from Poland to Rome via Gniezno, the Polish bishoprics would be forced to communicate, and air any grievances among other things, through Magdeburg. Without a doubt, it would lead to a greater German and imperial influence on Polish politics, and severely curtail the authority of the Dukes of Poland. I mean, just consider if there was a Duke of Poland who had some sort of issue with the Emperor, and he thought that there was some way that the Pope would be able to intervene on his behalf. So he goes to the bishop in Gniezno, and the bishop in Gniezno says, well, I would love to appeal directly to the Pope, but actually, I'm subordinate to the Archbishop of Magdeburg, who is under the thumb of the Emperor. That complaint isn't going to go anywhere. So, in a matter of just a few years, Bolesław's position as an independent and strong ruler in Eastern Europe has dramatically shifted. Allies aren't available in the way they used to be. Rome isn't reliable in the way that they wanted. And the Emperor, Lothar, has plenty of time to consider this state to his east. Manteuffel tells us that, quote, at the most critical moment, when the independence of the Polish Church hung in the balance, and defeated Denmark had submitted to the Emperor, Bolesław was called before the Emperor's court by Sobieslaw of Bohemia and Bela of Hungary. Finding himself in such an unfavorable political position that he could not depend on any support, Bolesław decided to check his opponents by arranging a compromise with the Emperor. In spring 1135, Bolesław sent emissaries and gifts to the Emperor, and in August personally left for Merseburg. Obviously, the Emperor did not fail to exploit Bolesław's difficult situation. And he did not limit himself to matters pertaining to Bohemia and Hungary. Rather, he demanded a full explanation of Poland's relationship to the empire. Because of the circumstances, Bolesław had to make concessions in every matter. He recognized Bela's suzerainty in Hungary, agreed to a truce with Bohemia, and finally, according to the tradition dating back to Mieszko, agreed to pay homage as Lord of Bohemia and Rugen and pay the tribute which had been in arrears for many years, from 1123, or the year when Western Pomerania was conquered, and amounted to 6,000 pounds of silver. These were formidable concessions that Bolesław was obliged to make, since they amounted to an acknowledgement of the supremacy of the empire in Western Pomerania. The compromise included a positive feature. Bolesław gained the right to expand towards Rugen and to maintain the independence of the Polish Church, which had been challenged by the claims of the Archbishop of Magdeburg. End quote. While all concerned parties were okay with this agreement, it wasn't the most opportune time to set up a new Eastern European order. That's because Bolesław's life was coming to a close. But Bolesław was not going to just go quietly into the night and leave everything to his eldest son, as you might expect. No, Bolesław had a number of sons, and wanted to make sure that they were all well taken care of. And, clearly not wanting them all to fight each other for the leadership position as he and his forebears had done, he wanted to clearly define the way of things. In addition to his own personal ambitions for his offspring, Bolesław was likely keenly aware that whatever he did had to survive the scrutiny of non-Piast nobles. As we've seen from the recent rebellion of Skarbimir, the upper echelons of Polish noble families were not big fans of the centralization of power that seemed to be taking place in Poland. We hear from Alexander Gieszczor in his book History of Poland that, quote, like some other European countries in the 12th century, Poland was to enter upon the course of transformation from old ways of life to new and more highly developed forms. The Polish court was alive to the fact that some old institutions were obsolete. The concentration of state authority in one person was no longer tenable. As we have seen, the monarchy was embroiled in the conflicting aspirations of local oligarchs, who turned dynastic quarrels, claims, and counterclaims of the ducal brothers to their own immediate advantage. End quote. With local, family, and international politics all in play, Bolesław drafted something called by a few different names: the Act of Succession, the Testament of Bolesław, or as I like to call it, a really, really big mistake that was well-intentioned but doomed to failure. Manteuffel tells us that, quote, realizing that he would soon die, Bolesław desired to formalize a system of succession in order forever to preserve the country from civil war and to protect ducal rule from debilitating challenges by the magnates. Bolesław therefore ordered that the princeps would receive, beyond his patrimony, a seigniorate province composed of the Krakow, Sieradz, and Łecieszka districts, the eastern section of Wielopolska, which included Kalisz and Gniezno, and the western section of Kujawia, including Kruszwica. This large province was intended to guarantee the princeps so preponderant an advantage that, at least theoretically, no one would dare to challenge him. Bolesław divided the remainder of the country among his 4 oldest sons, designating Silesia for Władysław, Mazovia and Eastern Kujawia for Bolesław, Wielopolska for Mieszko, and the Sandomierz and Lublin provinces for Heinrich. In contrast to the Russian system of succession, these provinces were to be hereditary in the respective branches of the dynasty. In the event that one of the lines should become extinct, the province would pass to the senior prince. The princeps also had suzerainty over Pomerania, the right to make administrative appointments in the major cities, and invest bishops in the provinces of the junior princes, to collect court fines, to coin money, and finally, supreme command over military affairs. Bolesław considered that if all members of the dynasty honored these statutes, then the unity of the state would be preserved and protected against upheavals which could come as a result of the intrigues of the magnates for free elections of a princeps. End quote. In case that was all a bit confusing, the general gist is that Poland would be divided into a small handful of sub-states, each ruled by one of Bolesław's family members. But, to make sure that it didn't totally destroy the state and to maintain some sense of unity, Bolesław also made sure that the sub-state centered on Kraków had advantages. Giestra tells us that, quote, "The testament ruled that the oldest living brother was to be the Grand Duke, and that he would enjoy considerable prerogatives in foreign and military affairs, and in ecclesiastical matters relating to the country as a whole. In addition to his hereditary district, the Grand Duke was to be heir to Little Poland and acquire suzerainty over Western and Gdansk Pomerania. Every duke who succeeded to these regions gained an economic, military, and political advantage over the other dukes." This all is a pretty novel system, but it just didn't work out the way that Bolesław expected. Even having the Pope ratify his last testament didn't help it stand up against the pressures of ambitious noble families, even though they were brothers. In fact, Manteuffel points out in his book that not only did the testament fail to protect Poland, it was actually the cause of a whole lot of conflict and eventually led to the collapse of the monarchy. But, in October of 1138, at the age of 52, Bolesław was unaware that was going to happen. And that is when he died. We'll get to the effects of his testament in the upcoming episodes, but what are we to think of Bolesław? He had ruled over Polish subjects from a very young age, had defeated his half-brother in a bloody civil war, had conquered valuable territory on the Baltic Sea, had forged, and lost, alliances with most of the players in the area, and had a strong line of dukes to follow in his footsteps in Poland, and through politically arranged marriages, his daughter would give birth to lines that would intermarry into the Rurik dynasty in Russia and the surrounding duchies and margraviates around Poland. Well, we didn't talk much about it. He also founded a number of important monasteries and churches, paid for substantial works of art, and seemed to try his best to rule well. So, he was notable, that's for sure. But as we'll see in the episodes to come, he fails the test of having a smooth transition of power, which I always believe is one of the key determinators in judging a historic ruler. In addition, he likely over-relied on military prowess when diplomatic measures might have been more effective. All in all, the rule of Bolesław was a mixed bag. But, despite the drawbacks, we'll miss talking of his ways. After all, we've been talking about him for practically a dozen episodes now. But it's time to move on. And that's what we'll do next time, as we delve into the world of his successors. It is a true mess to keep track of what happens, but it's important to cover, so we'll get to it. As always, thank you for listening. If you'd like to help support the creation of this podcast, you can donate at patreon.com/historyofpolandpodcast. If you can't spare the change, you can always leave a review on the various podcast apps, or follow along on social media by searching for the History of Poland podcast. And if you go to patreon.com, you may see an update to the perks that are going to be coming out. It's new, it's exciting, it's worth taking a look. I'll see you next time.